Over the past few decades, there has been more acceptance in Massachusetts for people of different sexual orientations, but a new report from the Massachusetts Commission on Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Queer, and Questioning Youth identifies several areas of needs, from homelessness and mental illness to bullying. To tell us about the report is the Commission's Executive Director, Prachniak. Thank you much for being with us, Corey.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
First of all, tell us a bit about the population you're talking about in this report, both the size and the different kinds of people, really.
Yeah, we have reported in this document around the new data we have on LGBTQ youth in the state, and we see that 15.2% of high school students are identifying as LGBTQ, which is more than 1 in 7, which I think is a lot bigger than people really think. And we really see a huge diversity here. We actually have more LGBTQ girls than we have LGBTQ boys. And we have a lot of diversity around race and ethnicity that reflects the diversity of the state. And geographically, too. We're not talking about just in urban areas. We have LGBTQ youth everywhere.
Well, you're talking about a broader population that is kids overall at this age. You know, they're trying to manage their sexual orientation. They're dealing with peer pressure. What's the difference between the straight kids and the kids that you're talking about here?
I think there's another layer for LGBTQ youth around the issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. I think every youth goes through some self-discovery, some questioning, may face peer pressure, may have some trouble communicating with parents. These are normal, factors in life. But for LGBTQ youth, they may not have someone who they can go to for help. They may not have someone to kind of look up to, a role model for them who identifies the same way. So when we think about families, if you're a youth, you have a lot in common usually with your parents, with other people in your family. You can go to them for help. It's not always true for LGBTQ youth. They may not have any other people in their family. So, we're really looking at how can we make sure that there are different areas where they can find support.
Well, of all the numbers, I think the one that alarmed me the most, even if it doesn't change much from year to year, is the percentage of LGBTQ youth who reported cutting themselves. That bothered me. What did you think about that?
Yeah, the numbers for LGBTQ youth who have engaged in self-harm, like cutting or even attempting suicide, there's a huge disparity. And it hasn't changed much, even as we've seen some other factors improve. And it is, of course, really concerning, especially when we look at the breakdown. We have a lot more girls and kind of femme-identified LGBTQ youth who are especially, having this disparity. And I think it reflects the fact that these youth, when they're kind of struggling with emotions and all of the other factors, like higher rates of unwanted sexual contact that also come with being LGBTQ, that they just don't always have the positive means to deal with these kind of negative emotions and depression and anxiety that we need them to have.
Well, part of what you're talking about here is normal people contending with something that causes mental illness in a way. They need treatment. So what about their ability to get that?
Well, we know that LGBTQ youth accessing healthcare in general can be really tough. They may not be thinking about how a doctor or a psychologist, a psychiatrist could help them. They may not feel comfortable going and accessing that service. How do they explain to their parents, if they're not out to their parents, why they're struggling, why they need help? So looking at things like youth groups, what professionals there are in schools, school counselors, school nurses, we're kind of, all of these are populations where youth can maybe get some assistance when they may not be ready to go and really seek out something like therapy that could, be beneficial.
What about the schools? Here in Boston, we hear a lot about social emotional learning, and I think maybe they're onto a lot of the things already that you're recommending, but what about the overall picture? What do you think is out there for kids, in schools at least?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a huge increase in the idea of social emotional learning and creating kind of safer and more welcoming school environments. I think those are all kind of up and coming ideas in the education field, and certainly LGBTQ youth stand to benefit from that. We have a growing number of GSAs, used to be Gay Straight Alliance, now usually stands for Gender and Sexuality Alliance. And that's a place where youth can go for peer support and to be connected to, a teacher who can act as a mentor and help connect them to service. And we've been working just in the past couple of months to give new trainings to school nurse leaders all around. I think that, that's another huge resource for health in these schools.
And one thing maybe you can flesh out a bit, because going back to the 1970s, when people hear about LGBT LGBTQ, I mean, they're thinking of white people, but you have quite a cross-section here that you're talking about too, right?
Yeah, definitely the data shows that youth of color are equally as likely to identify as LGBTQ than our white youth. And so we really are talking about a diverse population. This maybe was a kind of a niche group 20 years ago. Now it's a big segment of the population. And so all aspects of the population, when we think about youth of color, when we think about, youth with disabilities, low-income youth, rural youth, immigrant youth, all of these populations have LGBTQ youth. And we really do see some really troubling disparities when we look at race and ethnicity, where, these youth are facing a whole number of safety concerns in school beyond just bullying that other LGBT youth, white LGBT youth, may be less likely to be experiencing. So that's something that we're really looking at how to address.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Corey Prachniak from the Mass Commission on LGBTQ Youth. Corey, another serious problem you're looking at in this report is youth homelessness. Explain that and what these kids are up against.
Well, we do see a big disparity with LGBT youth experiencing homelessness. It's more than twice the rate of other youth. A lot of times this is because these youth may be rejected by their families or just not feel comfortable with their families and may leave on their own terms. And once they're experiencing homelessness, we know from the data in the state that they're more likely to be victimized with things like, exchanging sex for money or a place to stay. And they may not always feel welcome at shelters and places that are available.
Another concern, it sounds like old news in a way, is HIV, but what's the picture for young people with this?
I think that, we really still don't have universal sexual health education that's inclusive in schools. And things like the Healthy Youth Act, can help to accomplish this by adding standards. And, ultimately, we would love to see this taught in every district. And until we have that, we're still going to see disparities on HIV because the message about how to have safe relationships is not reaching LGBTQ youth.
What's the sense about bullying? I mean, are people finally getting the message to cut it out, or is this getting worse maybe because of social media?
I think that electronic-based bullying, like with social media, online texting, that is definitely, a huge realm where it's harder for the schools to address it like they can the bullying that's happening in the classroom. So that's definitely a big concern. There may have been some slight decrease in bullying over time in the school area, but we still see big disparities. We see multi-racial youth, multi-ethnic youth having higher rates of bullying than anyone else, and we see
being victimized by bullies.
Right, exactly, and we see lesbian, bisexual, transgender girls way more likely than their male counterparts to be bullied. So I think when we think about maybe gay or bisexual youth getting bullied in the locker room or, taunted because they're not masculine or that kind of thing, that still happens. But actually the gender role is kind of flipped, and it's these LGBTQ girls that really need the most support to address bullying.
What about adolescents talking about these experiences with parents? Has that changed at all, you think?
I definitely think that, as this becomes a more normalized part of our society and as LGBTQ people are more accepted, that's certainly helping with parents. But I think, one thing that we see from the numbers is that it can be hard for youth to relate to their parents in general, and hard for parents, to know how to begin conversations. So I think that, beyond just the issue of stigma, is also, just how do we help parents to build better skills to be able to speak to their youth about things that matter to them.
Well, I know with Commission, you're sort of an advocate. You issue an annual report. Do you help in other ways for help meet the needs of this population that you're writing about?
Definitely. Beyond the policy work that we do training and technical assistance. We do about 200 trainings for educators a year. We can help with direct interventions with youth when the situation merits it, helping with their parents and their teachers, so folks can receive that support from us. And we also help to connect youth to resources, and that's also on our website.
And finally, we should tell our viewers what that is if they need to look it up.
Yeah, it's mass.gov/CGLY. We have a resource map. You can put in a request to get help at your school and find other resources.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Great, thank you so much.
Corey Prachniak from the Mass Commission on LGBTQ Youth.